Hello, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. My name is Daniel Hahn. I'm delighted to have been asked to chair this evening's conversation about two very beautiful and very unusual books. Well, I suppose they're two beautiful, unusual projects that have kind of made their way into books, which you're going to hear about in just a moment. They're very different, these two books, but they're both, in one sense, trying to do the same thing. They're both kind of celebrations of, not just of words, but of the precision of words. But not just that, they're both using some kind of visual expression, some kind of visual medium, as a way of looking at what precisely words can do. They do look very different, and they are very different in style and in tone, and you're going to see a lot of pictures from both of them, I think, shortly. So I'm going to just very briefly introduce these two delightful people with whom you're sharing your evening. They will each talk for 10-15 minutes about their books. I will have a little chat with them both, but we will, as usual, leave plenty of time for you to ask questions about the books, ask questions about their work, make comments, and so forth. So, as usual, when you're hearing them talk, do think about things you'd like to ask them. At the far end of the stage, I'm going to wave the book as I talk. At the far end of the stage is Ella Frances Sanders, who is a writer and an illustrator who has lived all over the world. And you're where now? Where have you?
In Bath.
In Bath.
Yeah.
And have you kind of come to rest in Bath, or are you still on your way between places?
For the meantime.
For the meantime.
Yeah.
she's sort of on the move. Currently in Bath. Her book is called Lost in Translation, and it's a sort of celebration of the kinds of words in other languages that don't have a one-word equivalent in English. You will hear more about that in a moment. I should say that as a translator myself, my instinct is to be very nervous about this kind of thing. When I first saw some of these pictures online quite a long time ago, I thought, no, you can't say things like that. But I'm entirely seduced now, as I'm sure you will be when you see Ella talk about this book. To my immediate right is Dominick Tyler, who is a documentary photographer whose work has appeared in The Guardian, The Independent. He's worked for Médecins Sans Frontières. He's collaborated with Kate Rue on a book called Wild Swim, and he's talking about his new book, Uncommon Ground, which is, I think it's described as a visual glossary of the landscape, and it's using photography and language to explore the way we think about our landscape and the kind of very, very detailed components that make up our landscape. So we're going to hear a little bit from each of them. I think, Dom, you're going to go first.
I think so.
So Dom will talk a little bit about his book, and then Ella, and then we will chat, and then you. So now you know. You've been warned. And then you can go and you can get signed and, dinner and whatever. It's your problem after that. We're going to start with Dominick Tyler.
Thank you. I've got a clicker. I think I should be standing up. I think I'm going to sit. Is it all right if I sit?
I don't mind.
Are you going to stand?
There's not really much room to pace up.
No, there's not enough room to pace. You're right. I'm going to sit. Okay. Hello. I'm Dominick Tyler, and I've written this book, Uncommon Ground. And I thought maybe one way of introducing the book would be to talk a little bit about how I came to write it in the first place. And the story, I'm afraid, starts with childhood. I grew up in rural Cornwall, and the house, my childhood home, was surrounded by fields and woods and streams and all that kind of bucolic bliss you might imagine. And as a child, my routine when I got home from school was to throw my school books into a corner and disappear off into the outdoors for as long as I thought I could get away with, and occasionally for slightly longer. Now, I knew this part of the world as a child really, really well. I became quite intimately enmeshed with it. I can still retrace in my mind journeys that I took as a child across this landscape. As I got older, the journeys got further afield. And they became a really important part of my life. And then I moved. I moved to London to go to university and then later to study. And almost without realizing, that intimate knowledge about the countryside slowly dissolved. It was replaced with a new kind of knowledge about the city. And I didn't really realize that this process was happening at the time. And then in 2007, which marked the point in my life where I'd spent as much time living in London as I had living in Cornwall, I was asked to work on the book that Danny mentioned, Wild Swim. For those of you who don't know, Wild Swim is a guide to the best places to swim outdoors in the UK. And I was asked to take the photographs for that book, which was an absolute dream commission. I've always loved swimming, and I've always loved the water. Spent a lot of time in the river as a child. And for Wild Swim, we got to travel the length and breadth of the United Kingdom, finding the most wonderful places to swim. So lakes, rivers, the sea, reservoirs, ditches, ponds, puddles, whatever you name it. We found it. The course of that year spent finding wonderful watery places. I was reminded how much I'd left behind in the landscapes of Cornwall and how I'd had this intimate knowledge once, but I'd sort of lost touch with it. But what also came back was that the feeling wasn't quite the same as an adult as it was when I was a child. When I was a child, I didn't really think about it. I just sort of went out and enjoyed it. And as an adult, I found that I had new needs for the landscape. In particular, a need to describe it and to communicate it to other people. This came to a head when Kate asked me to write up a few of the entries for the book. And I found that, to my intense shame and surprise, I didn't have the language to describe the countryside. I'd assumed that because I grew up in the countryside, it would all just be there, but when I came to use it, it really wasn't. And when I went looking for it, I couldn't find the resource that I needed to describe it. So it was that sense of shock and shame and surprise that led me to produce Uncommon Ground, which is the first book I've written and the first kind of project all of my own that I've produced. I would like to show you a few pictures and then maybe just read out one of the entries to give you a flavour of what the book's about. So let's show you some pictures. Now this is a zawn, which is a fantastic word for a wonderful feature. It comes from the Cornish word zawn. It's a feature you find in the southwest, although the word has been used to describe features elsewhere as well. And it's a steep-sided coastal inlet. This is a cornice. This is near, where is this near? It'll come back to me, I hope. Cairngorm. It's near Cairngorm, and it's a cornice. A cornice is when you have the shelf of snow, compacted snow, which cantilevers over a ridge. This, in the southeast, is an ooze, which is a southeast dialect word for a mudflat. In the estuarial areas of the southeast, you get lots of wonderful oozes, which I think is a fantastically descriptive word for a mass of mud, isn't it? It describes not only what it is, but what it does. This is a tolmen, and a tolmen is a hold stone. Comes again from Cornish, from menan tol, which is hold stone. And these are perfectly natural creations. They're made by vortices in rivers that start boring out holes in rocks, massive stone slabs. This is granite. And the hole here is big enough to fit through. And people, before they realized the natural forces could create them, they assumed that mythical creatures or gods or monsters created them. And so they became used in lots of rituals and later adopted by Christian rituals as well. This is a moonglade. Probably everyone has seen a moonglade, but you might not necessarily know that there is a word for it. And this is my attempt to illustrate one of my favorite words, which is a cow belly. And I think cow belly is the one I'm gonna read to you, if that's okay. In the slow, wide meanders of rivers, where the current slacks to near stillness, the finest sediments carried in the water are allowed to fall to the riverbed, where they form a silt as soft as a cow's belly, hence cow belly. These sediments are so subtle that the layer in which they're suspended lies between a liquid and a solid state. Bare toes entering a cow belly would register a change of temperature before a change of substance, from silky water to silky mud. A summer day that I spent beside the river liner with my friend Nicky and his family has stuck unusually firm in my usually flaky memory. A triptych of strong sensory experiences left their mark. I remember the feel of the cowbelly under my feet as we waded out to a deep pool that was held in the crook of the river bend. I remember the taste of hot dogs, sun-poached in their can, which we ate briny and dripping in our feral fingers, juddering with cold from swimming. And then there was the sight of Nicky's mum sunbathing. I can't remember whether or not she was topless, which would have added a prepubescent frisson, but I do remember that her skin was as smooth and tanned as the Frankfurters. I didn't have a word for any of these experiences that day, and even now I would struggle to name the first two, junk food joy and proto-lust, describe but don't evoke. When I read the definition of cowbelly for the first time in a book called Home Ground, Language for an American Landscape, it was instantly familiar. It retrospectively named the experience so perfectly that it's hard to believe I didn't always know the word, and I will always associate it with the nitrate tang of the hot dogs and the unsettling magnetism of exposed skin. That's how I've gone about investigating these landscape features and words, sometimes through personal experience and sometimes just through science or folklore. And I'm just going to leave you, if I got time just to show, okay, I'll leave you with a very short film, which is kind of like a trailer for the project.
There are some, as you will have seen, some very beautiful pictures in this book, and some amazing words. I'm a writer, and it's exciting to find words. I was almost disappointed to get a tour at the end. I thought, I actually knew that one. Most of these words are words I don't think I'd ever seen before. Anyone who plays Scrabble will appreciate these words well. Was there there's a Z word.
Zawn. Zawn's a good one.
Zawn was a really good Scrabble
yeah.
word. But it's full of these lovely words as well as lovely images. Before I ask Ella to talk about her book, Dom, I want to ask you something which is such a general question, it's going to sound easy and I suspect will be really difficult, which is, what difference does it make to you knowing this stuff now? Now that you know these words and this kind of way of expressing things, what difference does it make to your experience of these places?
Well, I'm tempted to say I can be boring about a whole new range of things.
Which is not to be discounted.
No, it's really useful. I think it has. I mean, this is a bit of a soundbite, but I think it has changed the way that I view the landscape. I think that I'm much more attentive to minutiae than I was. It's strange, and it shouldn't maybe be the case, but as soon as you have a name for something, even if it's an insignificant detail, it suddenly becomes more noticeable. And so for me, I always was a little bit obsessed by sort of little details of things. But now I seek them out more and try and fit them into bigger patterns more. So.
And do you think the fact that I presume that most of these words were better known, even if only locally, than they are now?
Yeah.
Do you think the fact that we're losing a lot of these words is also symptomatic of a change in the way we think about the landscape generally? I mean, you will have heard, many of you will know that, I think it was the Oxford Junior Dictionary, the new edition published in January, they had to find space for a lot of tech words, a lot of modern words, and so they removed things like I was going to say blackberry, the old kind of blackberry, not the one with the buttons. But acorn, they remove the names of a lot of bits of the natural world. So do you think that there is this risk that we're losing, that the loss of the words in currency is actually losing a connection?
Yes, definitely. I mean, our lexis mirrors our experience, and our experience is becoming increasingly urbanized and less involved in, even the people who live in the countryside are less intimately involved than they were. To really know and understand the countryside, I think you probably have to work it. You have to be in it every day. You have to be physically interacting with it, and that's the kind of environment in which a lot of our language was created. A lot of our landscape language was created at a time we were as intimately connected as that. And over the last 100 years, a lot of that has been lost. So yeah, I did often come across words which were in common use, 2 generations ago, and which have simply fallen out of use. The Oxford Junior Dictionary is a symptom of our disconnection, and so I had a lot of sympathy with OJD getting a lot of flack for taking these words out. Well, actually, we should be looking to ourselves and questioning our own experience of the landscape and wondering why it is that the OJD found that when they asked kids whether they used these words, they didn't. And that's not the dictionary's fault. That's our fault for not letting our kids get exposed to the landscape.
Thank you. We'll come back, I think, to those questions. Ella, would you say a little bit about Lost in Translation?
Of course. I'm going to get my first picture. Oh. The reproduction's awful. Okay. So I will start off by saying that my book was, for the most part, an accident, an unplanned, unforeseeable accident. You may or may not be surprised to know that I'm not a linguist. I'm not an academic as such, although I would like to think I'm pretty good at, reading and writing, the basics. So I didn't plan on writing a book, and if you go even further back than that, I wouldn't have told you I was going to be an illustrator either. So it all happened very back to front, and I still have no idea what's going on myself.
Like most of us. Some of us have been doing this for years.
Yeah, but it's good for...
Wondering.
I like to say it, because then other people feel, oh, yeah, that's me too. Right, so for those of you that don't know, which may be all of you, Lost in Translation stemmed from a blog post that I wrote in August 2013 for the company I was interning with at the time. And so just over 2 years ago. And it was a Wednesday. It was a very ordinary Wednesday. And I wrote this blog post entitled 11 Untranslatable Words from Other Cultures. And so this small, hurriedly written blog post went viral. I didn't even know what that meant at the time. It turns out millions of people view your post in a short period of time, and then thousands of people comment on it. These comments varied from rage to joy, everything in between. Turns out people really like to talk about words, about languages, their cultures. They get really, really into it. And then in my case, this viral blog post meant that an editor contacted me via Twitter with a cryptic message about book potential. And I was like, oh, book potential. No. So if we now fast forward a bunch of time, so it was a relatively painful process. It wasn't. And we fast forward to September 16th of last year when the US edition was published. The UK edition was only published in this June. So that's kind of a little bit of the backstory, and now I'm going to show you a few images from the book and talk a little bit about them. The 52 words found in Lost in Translation were ruthlessly culled from a list of over 200 that I compiled. Don't ask me what the other 148 were, because chances are I will not remember. Okay, so I don't know whether you'll be able to read my illegible lettering from back there, so I will go over the definitions and offer some of my own thoughts that aren't necessarily in the book. Actually, they're probably not in the book because they're probably edited out, not by me. And if it makes you feel any better, I can't see you either because I should be wearing glasses. So first up, I hope you can at least read the large word. First up is sundoku. This is a Japanese word which describes when you have bought a book and it inevitably goes unread. This unread book will then find its way to all the other unread books that you own and form a pile, which these then grow to. And probably some of you are guilty of this terrible affliction. I am. You were. You said you were. Okay, so I could just hold on to this instead of leaning forwards. So next up is saudade, which is a Portuguese word. Daniel translates a lot of things from Portuguese, so he might know.
So I hate this word. It makes me very angry, this word. I'm changing the subject now.
Okay, we can talk about this. I think this word deserves a book entirely to itself. It could certainly fill one. So in a lengthy nutshell, saudade is a state of profound nostalgia, of profound melancholy, of profound longing for something or someone that you have loved and then lost. In my case, I've probably just misplaced that thing. And someone more articulate than me once described it as the love that remains. So the love that is left behind when this person or thing has gone. So a kind of incompleteness. It's pronounced differently depending on what kind of Portuguese you're speaking. So Brazilian Portuguese, they say saudade. And with European Portuguese, they say more like saudade. So it's more like a DE on the end. And to give you some idea of how seriously the Brazilians take this word, they have a official celebration, a Saudade Day, on January 30th. I don't know whether it's a particularly happy event or... I don't know. So the next word I want to touch on is Goya. Goya is an Urdu word. For those of you who don't know, Urdu is the national language of Pakistan. It's spoken across 5 Indian states, various other places. There's about 50 million speakers worldwide, so it's not entirely insignificant. And Goya is a transporting suspension of disbelief, with a kind of hold on reality. And the best way to describe this is if you think about reading an incredible book, you are taken somewhere else, but it feels like it's real. And I hope you've been experiencing some Goya whilst at the festival without knowing it. So next is forelsket. Forelsket is a Norwegian word which describes the euphoria we feel when we first fall in love. And as many of you probably know, that's often completely indescribable. And yeah, I hope the illustration kind of speaks for itself. In fact, I could not talk at all. I can just show you the pictures, because hopefully that's what they do. This is personally one of my favorites. Mostly because I have a strange love for drawing one thing over and over and over and over again. This is tame. This is very tame. So the last two words I want to show you kind of loop back to Dominick's book in a roundabout way. Nature, landscape, all the wonderful things you talked about that I've since forgotten because I'm so full of adrenaline. This is komorebi, which is another Japanese word. They have a lot of good ones. And it is the word for the sunlight that filters through the leaves of trees. I came up here to Scotland thinking I might not experience this, but actually the sun did come out today. Yeah, and I made a note which was vaguely poetic. I said it provides a gentle, dappled wonderland below. So, and I feel today that, as distracting as the internet is incredibly distracting, we don't often look up. So I try to look up sometimes from my desk. And the last word is Wohleinsamkeit, which is a German word. The Germans feel that they can add words together, many words together, and then tell everyone else that they still make sense. This isn't that bad. It's made up of the words Wald, which means woods, and Einsamkeit, which is aloneness or solitude. So it's essentially wood aloneness. But if you're putting it in a sentence, it is the feeling of walking through the woods alone. I understand that this feeling may also be terror, depending on how used to darkened, wooded areas you are. I haven't turned my page. That's why I'm looking. Yeah, and it's also a connectedness to nature that you're experiencing. It's talked about as a feeling, but you can also describe Wohleinsamkeit as a physical place. So I could say, I'm going to flee to the green Wohleinsamkeit, in a similar way that I would say I'm going to flee to the green castle. Example. You'll see what I mean. And we can be relatively sure the Germans felt a need for this word. They have incredible, vast forested areas, main one being the Black Forest in Baden-Württemberg, which I've been to a couple of times, Schwarzwald, which I think was the setting for the Grimm brothers fairy tales, and I like to imagine Hansel and Gretel, Little Red Riding Hood, experiencing Wohleinsamkeit before it, turned nasty. And the last thing I wanted to mention is a poem by Ralph Waldo Emerson. He has a poem entitled Wohleinsamkeit, and I'm just going to read you one of the verses from somewhere in the middle. Or on the mountain crest sublime, or down the oaken glade, oh, what have I to do with time? For this the day was made. So on that note, which may be a terrible note to end on, I don't know, we're now going to talk about related things. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I can leave it there.
Yeah, leave it there.
Okay,
Yeah.
we'll just leave it there. All right.
You've got to do lots of trees on this one as well.
No, this is few trees. There wasn't enough.
I imagine early drafts which go over meters and meters of trees, and you're ready to say, I'm sorry, Ella, we're really going to have to keep it this big. No more than 30 trees for you.
Uh-huh.
I want to ask you, Ella, something about what is really interesting for me about this is these are all words we haven't got kind of one word equivalent of in English, but they're all describing things that we in fact recognize. These are not states of mind that are alien to us, they're not states of mind that are unique to people in Germany or people in Japan or whatever it is. And what I love about this, about so many of the words here, is that it actually draws attention not to the kind of weirdness of the thing, but the universality of what they're talking about.
Yeah, no, I agree, because I think, as you said, it makes it less alien and more relatable. And suddenly you see a gap or a window into that culture that you hadn't seen before, and this person on the other side of the world also experiences this thing, and it turns out they have a word for it. I mean, I think English is an incredible language, but I think we certainly have gaps, in places. But you fill some of those gaps.
I think, yes, so the aim of this evening is everyone has to learn all of these words and use both of them, both sets of words.
Yes,
And
he has
and
way
use
more
them,
words
and
than
use
me,
them.
though. I've only got
And use them
52.
regularly.
Yeah, we had this discussion. I
Yeah.
pointed out you had all the languages to call from. So I think, well,
We thought I could do about 10 plus volumes. Just
yeah,
keep
we
going.
could just keep going forever
Yeah.
and ever and ever.
Choose, but Ella, I'm not going to ask you what the other 148 were because you said we're not allowed to ask you. But how did you, first of all, how did you get this, where did you find these sort of 200 to choose from? And how did you decide which ones were going to make it into the book?
I've said to you earlier, I wish that my publisher had paid for me to travel to all these wonderful places and get to know the locals and, ask them what their untranslatable words were.
Your publisher is in the room, so we all think that's a good idea, don't we? Yes, there we go.
We have the people's support.
We're going to take a vote on the way out. There we go.
Yeah. No, but really it was 3 months of being chained to a desk. And there are a few books have already been written on the subject. There's a guy called Adam Jacot de Boinard who has written a couple now. It's called The Meaning of Tingo. Tingo is another great word from Easter Islands, which is when you gradually take things from a friend's house and never return them. You're all guilty. You're all lost.
Don't know what you're talking about. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Do you keep
people
doing this
do that?
until there's nothing left in your friend's house? It's like
Well,
a practical
I don't know
joke,
when it
one by
ends.
one,
I
until there's
don't
nothing
know.
I
left.
presume that is the ultimate.
The ultimate tango, yeah.
Someone gets home and goes, I'm sure I had some stuff.
Yeah.
I definitely had. Where is it all? Wasn't there like a sofa or something? There was something in this room.
Yes, so I was reading books that had already been written on the subject, and then I turned to the vast, vast internet, which was both a curse and a blessing, because you have to sift truth from the lies. I said to Dominick earlier, I felt the internet was like a giant game of Chinese whispers, because some person over here types what they know, it's sent, it's emailed, it's whatever to the next person, they type it to another friend slightly differently, and so there was a lot of cross-referencing and things like that. I'm sure I could have taken a lot longer to research these words, and
But you also have to come up with yourself a definition which
Yeah.
feels kind of robust and useful.
Exactly.
I looked at, first of all, at the two Portuguese words, obviously because it's a language I have, and they're very well described, but they're quite hard to describe. I
Well,
think.
it's almost impossible in the sentence that they gave me up there. I had one sentence, and like I said, Saudade could probably have a book all to itself. But I guess it's just putting I think it works so well, this format, because although the definition was so short and so stunted in a way, the illustration, the idea was that made up for it, because then to a certain extent people can create their own definition. They can look at the picture and think, yeah, I would put it slightly differently, but essentially I get it. Yeah.
And was the being able to illustrate these things, was that in any way part of deciding what you did, that you could actually come up with some way of representing them, or did you just challenge yourself to find a way? Because a lot of these are very abstract things, and again, I'd have thought, having no useful visual sense at all myself, I don't know quite how you get from sort of very abstract ideas of emotion or behaviour to something which is beautiful, but also kind of explains something visually.
Yeah, I mean, some of them are definitely more abstract than others. And this extended list I had of 200, I would like to say I picked them based on other things, but I did go through and think, can I illustrate this? And if the answer was yes, then it went into my nearly final list. But it varied. I mean, the 52 that are in the book, some of those illustrations came to me really naturally, and then other days it was day after day after day of trying to think of a way to visualize this which people would understand. Yeah, but nobody said that any of them are particularly terrible, so I hope it's okay.
Edinburgh Book Festival audience may be the first. They're mostly quite nice here, but you never know. Someone will say, it's not quite what the Norwegian means, really. Don, what about you? What was the process for you in terms of, first of all, deciding what was going to be represented, because you have so much to choose from, and also the sort of sequence of, do you decide what the words are and then find a place where you can produce a beautiful photo, or do you look at the landscape first? Or?
Well, it happened in every different possible permutation of those combinations. Sometimes I saw something and photographed it, not knowing that there was a word for it, and then went and found the word for it. Sometimes I found an amazing word in an old dictionary, or someone told me something, and then I would struggle to find a location to illustrate it. And sometimes the two kind of came together at the same time. But I had the same process as Ella at a certain point when I was narrowing down. When I had a list of words which were kind of constantly in flux and changing, I had to look at them and decide whether they were landscape features that I could effectively illustrate with the photograph. There's quite a lot of sort of geology that I would have liked to put in, but a lot of it you can't photograph very easily. So I tried to sneak them into other definitions.
Is this a finished project now? I mean, have you got to the point where you found the things you want to find, they're in a book, it's printed, people can buy it, and you now...
Yeah, well, the book's finished, thank God. The project
I'm sure it was a delight.
Oh yeah, no, every moment was joy.
But that apart.
The book is a sort of full stop now, but the project of collecting the words continues. I have a website called thelandreader.com, which is acted when the project was going on as a sort of place where you could find information about the project and kind of communicating about the project, but now has a life beyond that, which is as a repository of a kind of bigger glossary. I only have 100 or so words in here, and I have lists of sort of thousands of words. So thelandreader.com has more and has a growing list, and members of the public can submit words to it as well, which is great, because I get emails every now and then from people saying, "Ooh, round our neck of the woods, we call that a," so I can add that to the list.
What about you, Ella? Are you getting people? I tell you, if my translator friends knew about this, you'd be inundated by
Don't tell them.
emails and people saying, and there's a Finnish word as well. Are suggestions still coming in? Are people wanting you to do more?
Yeah, people are really keen on saying, please include this in book 2.
Book 2?
Well, yes, I know.
You brought it up. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know. They do email me.
Yeah.
Often, with their suggestions, which is really nice, because people, once you open up a conversation like this, it's something so personal and so universal that, people can, it's so easy to send an email now. They can email me from the other side of the world and say, hey, there's a word for this, and include it in book 2. There isn't a book 2.
But were there hypothetically a book 2, one would include other things in it?
Yeah, I mean,
Excellent.
like I mentioned, there are so many of these words, and they're not all out there. They're not all written down in forums and on blogs on the internet yet. Some of them are far too obscure and are from languages which have died or will soon die out, which I find incredibly sad. So I could take it upon myself to go on a word hunt, and
That sounds like a brilliant TV program. International word hunt.
Great exposure.
Wouldn't it be great?
Yeah. But no, it's not an academic book. Like I've said, it's
It's not trying to
hopefully
be complete, is it?
no.
So
And
it's
and
just-
someone has said it was a dictionary, and I said, hang on a second. No, it's not a dictionary at all. It's meant
it's a terrible dictionary.
Well,
if it's a dictionary, it doesn't work at all.
call it that, but yeah. Hopefully it starts the conversation. It's not an end to anything. Hopefully it gets people more interested in languages, more interested in these other cultures, and then maybe they go and find out more, and then maybe they ask, members of their far-flung family if this is true or not, and yeah. So it's a start to a conversation, really.
And also, I think, in a way that DOMS is so localist, so about this particular place, and has to be about this language. There are lots of ways in which yours, Ella, would also work in lots and lots of other places, that everyone in the world would be interested in this kind of thing. I should mention, I don't think I mentioned this to you beforehand, a writer I translate, a Portuguese language writer I translate, saw my copy of this book about 2 months ago, and I just received it, and was very excited to find these 2 Portuguese words in there, and decided that what these particular words were, he was wondering whether they are somehow representative of the culture. And he wrote a column in, I think, the biggest newspaper in Brazil, which I will have to send you, about these 2 words and whether they are somehow emblematic of something, because they are the 2 which don't have a kind of one-word translation. And there was a funny kind of there was a funny kind of pride, I think, in having language that does this thing that no one else can do. Everyone else feels these things, but having this really exciting richness of language that both of these books are celebrating.
Like you say, it can be emblematic of a culture. I mean, I'd be interested to know if he did feel that they represented.
I shall send you this article.
Okay.
You will have to learn Portuguese, however.
Yes.
Can you not translate it? Can you not translate it?
Translating is very difficult. It's all untranslatable.
Isn't that your
I don't
job?
believe in any of this. Any of this nonsense, I tell you.
Fair enough.
We have a little over 15 minutes left, and I'm going to stop hogging the conversation, and I think ask you to. And there you are. The lights go up, and there you are. And we have a question right here immediately. We're very grateful for the first person to ask a question. So thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
I've got a question for Ella.
Okay.
Do you remember the original 11 words from the post? And did any of those
This feels like a
make
test.
it still in the book?
They did actually. Volnine Tamkite was in the list. There's an Inuit word pronounced hopefully something like Ixrapok, which is the illustration on the UK cover, which is the act of going outside when you are, well, not necessarily when someone's coming, but you think someone might be coming to the door, so you go outside and check anyway.
Again, we've done it.
But
It's the sense of, is there someone?
yeah.
Is that,
Or
it's-
pushing the curtain aside, and just could be.
You will recognise yourself. It is quite weird, actually. There's a word. Look, there's a word for it.
So a few in the original list aren't in the book. Komorebi, the one I showed before this, was also in the original list. There was a Hawaiian word which I put in the original blog post and then had very mixed reactions. Some people said it was a word panapo, which I thought to be the act of scratching your head to remember something you've forgotten. So I'm sure you all do this because you think and you're like, this somehow will help me remember. And then someone emailed me and said this is a really offensive thing to scratch your head in Hawaii. So we left it a bit unchecked and thought best not put it in the book if that is the case. So some of them yes, some of them no. Yeah.
I suppose you could conceivably upset people if your interpretations of the words are sort of a little bit
Exactly.
vague. Because for a lot of people, these things will actually be
Exactly.
important.
But you
I mean,
can't
I
blame
don't
me
know any
entirely.
words of nerds
No,
myself,
you
I
can't blame me
imagine.
entirely because there's a horde of other people who are also going around believing the same thing as me. So it is a group misunderstanding.
It's all their fault. Next question, please. There on the aisle. Thank you.
Hi. For both of you, what are your favourite words in English?
It's unfair to restrict Ella to English, surely.
Yes. Favourite words in any language? Start in English.
I often get asked this, and from the book, Cowbelly I really like, because of that experience of knowing the thing and then having it named and then sort of knowing the thing all over again. But I'm just flicking through to see if any particularly inspire me. Actually, the ones from Cornwall are the ones that I really like. Tor, I know it's not the most esoteric, but it's such a solid block of a word, and it describes these solid blocks of granite. And also, I like the fact that it's a proper Celtic word, like it's an old Celtic word, and it's survived kind of linguistic weathering. Just like the rocks survived kind of actual weathering, so it's kind of this knob of rock that's just carried on, and this knob of a word that's just carried on. I like Tor.
In English. I have two very different words. One of them is serendipity, because I feel that it's actually a word in English that is more or less untranslatable into then other cultures. I mean, we thought about including English words in the book and decided not to, but I think serendipity would have been in there. So that's one of my favourites. And currently, just popped in. I mean, they change, but right now, one of my favourite words is sponge. There you have it. Serendipitous sponge? Yeah.
Very good. Another question. The gentleman at the back, please.
Hi. I was just wondering if you'd managed to incorporate any of these words into your everyday conversations with friends or in text or email or something like that.
Either of you. How about that?
Shall I?
Yeah,
I'll
Yeah, you
answer.
go first. Yeah.
People have asked me this question before, actually. And it may be disappointing, but unless I'm talking about the book, unless I'm talking about the words in the context of the book, it's a bit too obvious to try and slip them in mid-sentence. It sounds terrible.
Sounds like you're advertising, basically.
Yes, self-promotion. So, in my case, not so much, unless I'm telling somebody about whatever the word is. Yeah.
I do. One of the ones I like to point out to people in City is a desire path, which you probably all have seen. You might even heard the phrase before. And it's in a park. You'll get someone or lots of people have walked instead of on the regular path. They've just walked straight across the green lawn, and they've created an unofficial route, which then gets adopted by more and more people, mostly because it's a useful route. It's a quick way from A to B. That's a desire path. And I like pointing that out because I like the idea that even in the kind of manicured, controlled space in the city, you get a kind of phenomena that's almost like a kind of animal behavior phenomenon. So I point that one out a lot. And I also try and, I've started to try and invent some and get them used. So the one that I'm trying to get into circulation at the moment is Rohican, which is so it's that strip of grass in the middle of a track, and for obvious reasons.
Go forth.
So
and
please
use this word.
take Rohican to the four corners of the world and use it, and let's get it in the dictionary in a year's time.
And there isn't a word for this.
I couldn't find one. The closest I could find, there's some lovely words. Drovers who took cattle to market used to call the verges on the edge the long acre because it was a pasture for the cows. And there's a nice East Anglian word marfa, which is for the kind of overgrown edges of fields or the overgrown edges of roads. But I haven't found a specific word for the one in the middle. So.
And it's probably the case that we don't normally notice when we're missing a word until someone points it out to us.
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't know what that thing is called, but it, swear to God, it's never occurred to me that I didn't know the word for it.
Well, there you go. And as soon as you know Rohicans, you can, it's really useful as well. Don't take the road with the Rohican.
It does.
Go left at the
slightly
Rohican.
depend on someone else knowing this as well. And this is always going to be the issue with the answer to your question. That if you say, turn left at the zawn.
Yeah.
You may want to take a copy of my book with you as a reference.
It's a good marketing tool, yeah. I could stand in remote places giving out directions that would need the book.
If you want to make it out of here alive, you may.
Yeah.
Give you directions, but
Think you'll find
Here is not-
page 40 very useful. Yeah.
The example you gave in the first answer to that question, the desire path, is that the kind of thing that you had noticed as a phenomenon before you knew there was a word for it?
Yes, definitely. But that was one of the words that I knew before I started the book.
Okay.
And actually, interestingly, this is a slightly convoluted story, but I'm going to try and tell it really quickly. And it goes back to your point about the internet being a difficult tool for investigation and research. Is that there are a lot of places on the internet that say that the term desire path was coined by a French philosopher called Gaston Bachelard, and that he wrote about it in a book called Poetics of Space, which is a very highfalutin book which lots of architects like to have in their office, whether or not they read it. And so I knew about... Sorry, any architects in the room?
I'm going to admit it now, are they?
Okay, that wasn't meant to be... okay, I'll carry on. But even though that fact that Gaston Bachelard coined this phrase is repeated ad infinitum on the internet, he didn't. It's just the fact that it's been repeated ad infinitum on the internet. It's almost got to the stage where it's accepted as fact. But if you go and read, as I did, because I thought, it would be interesting to find out what page that's on. If you go and read the book, it's not there. It's not even there in the original French. So he didn't coin that phrase. Someone else coined that phrase. The earliest incidence is a time and motion study done by the Chicago Department of Transport in 1923. Sorry, that's another piece of information I have to send out into the world.
Here on the aisle, and then right behind.
I've got one for Dominic.
Hi.
I know that they're all meant to be English words, as it were, but I think maybe there were some Gaelic ones.
Oh no, they're not all English words.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
Like, do you have any sort of issue around spelling? You know, whether like they're in like a traditional spelling or
lots
or
of issues.
like Anglophile. As it were.
Yeah, well, I've tried to stick as close as I could to Gaelic. If I was having a Gaelic word, I tried to stick as close as possible to it. But and I did take advice, but I've had a few people query a few things. So I think it's within permissible limitations. I found a lovely Gaelic word in an old copy of Dwelly's, which is Frauen. I'm not sure how to pronounce this. Fraoin, Frauen, and it's a lovely word because it's really specific. It's a sheltered rock or sheltering rock or cave in the mountains, and this is a good example of me seeing something, photographing it, and thinking there must be a word for that. There must be a word, I thought, in Gaelic for one of these sheltering spaces in the mountains. And there's even a place up over beyond Cairngorm called Sheltering Stone, where there's quite a few of them. So yeah, that was a lovely, and there's quite a lot of Gaelic actually in there, because it's really rich and it's very descriptive as well, very linked to the place.
Thank you. Yes.
I guess I sort of have like thoughts on both books, but maybe with the same central theme, which is that both your books have a very positive focus. Like these are beautiful poetic terms to describe the dappling of sunlight through leaves. And I guess, especially because I speak German, and so people will tell me all the time that like Schadenfreude is a word for a special ugly emotion only Germans feel. And then they say, no, there's an English word for that, spite. But we like to pretend as a sort of euphemism that this is a German thing. And the same thing, we use foreign terms to dress up, when you say, I found a picture of my grandmother and she was dressed as a courtesan. The word you're not saying. And so that foreign terms will be used as euphemisms for things that are negative. That was one thing. And the other is that this identifying of geographical features. Maybe you saw that, I've forgotten what it's called and who wrote it, but the book with the term snout house in it. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Snout house, no.
Really good word.
There was some project at a university in the U.S. where they tried to come up with terms for all the worst mistakes of modern planning, and the snout house was the term they came up with for the sort of house that has a garage coming out the front.
Oh,
so
yeah.
And I was wondering if you have also words in your books for negative, ugly, nasty things.
Negative, ugly, nasty things. There were probably some in the original 200, and my editor probably said, Ella, this is a bit negative. It's meant to be a positive book.
You have to be able to draw something pretty for this.
Yeah, I mean, are there any? I mean, the one I showed and talked about, Saudade, is quite melancholic, can be quite depressing. Maybe I should do a second book of all really negative, nasty. I think it was more that maybe we should try to keep it positive overall, because if I had written, the market might have lessened slightly. So no, they were kept. In my case, they were kept to a minimum. But Schadenfreude is a great one. Great for I concluded too many German ones. There was a limit. I could have just done 52 German words, but
You can see all of the spin-offs coming up. Just 52 German words. 52
Lost in Translation German version.
Yes.
Lost in Translation Portuguese version.
There's an interesting question, that the first thing about whether there is a sort of deliberate thing of using foreign words as a way of distancing distancing things from us, even if we could find a way of, because these
Yeah,
are all
exactly.
things that we can express in English, as
Yeah.
you've done in your definitions.
Just slightly, maybe
but
less
somehow
articulately.
we're saying that they are a little bit odd and not quite right or not quite normal.
Yeah.
There might be
That's
sides of
funny.
humanity that we're less keen to accept.
I think in my case that there is an example. It's not using foreign words to make something that's maybe ugly sound better, but it's using a kind of poetic language, and that is witches' knickers, which is a term for plastic bags that are caught in trees or caught on barbed wire, and they kind of flap around. And I love it. I think it's a brilliant phrase. But what it does do is it makes you smile when you think of litter. Which is maybe not great.
Good work.
Yeah.
So children, now learn.
Yeah, which is knickers.
Yeah.
But that's actually quite a close example of what you're describing. We created a lovely kind of poetic visual term for something that's actually kind of horrible.
It's just typical, isn't it? Just the kind of thing we do.
Yeah, someone had a bit of a go at me for going on about witches' knickers, and I thought actually they got a good point, because litter's horrible. But then I said, I still think that litter is horrible, but it's nice to have a nice word to describe it, isn't it? Surely it doesn't take all the horridness away from.
And it's not just nice, it's also a very precise thing. It's not just any old litter. You're talking
No,
about
that's
a thing
specific,
which
yeah.
has a very strong visual. Everyone recognises. Everyone can picture what that is.
And I think I think a campaign against witches' knickers is probably more effective than a campaign against plastic bags and trees.
Caught in trees. And that's another thing for you to go off and do now. You see a long list of things for you to go to run off and do, and words you've got to use. And
It's homework.
We'll give you a little handout on the way out of all the things you've been instructed to do. We are, I'm afraid, just about out of time now. So the first thing, of course, you're going to have to do once you've thanked these people is go to the bookshop and buy their books, and they're very beautiful. Have a look at their books, and I'm sure you'll both be happy to sign them. I'm guessing.
Of course.
So I would encourage you to do that. They're really beautiful and full of stuff to discover and go back to and talk about. I urge you to do that. Before that, of course, do please join me in thanking these two wonderful artists and writers for a fascinating hour. Dominick, Tyler, and Ella Francis Sanders.
Thank you.